In this tutorial, we're going to talk about using the Python interpreter with variables. We'll talk about what a variable is, how we create them, we'll briefly talk about what types are, and we'll look at how we can use variables. So if you've opened your PyScripter application, you'll remember that the interpreter is down here in the bottom part of your screen. And last tutorial we looked at using the interpreter just to perform simple calculations. But what if you needed to use a value over and over again? For instance, if you needed to remember what pi was because you were making some calculations with circles. It'd be a lot easier if you could just create something that would remember what pi is for you. And this is what we can do with a variable. Here we've created the name for our variable, which is simply pi, pi, and then we've used the equal sign, one equal sign, which is the assignment operator, which is something that takes whatever's on the right hand side of the equal sign and stores it in the name that we created on the left. So after I press enter, I can now ask Python what pi is, and it tells me it's 3.14 with a slight kind of error due to how it's storing that value internally. But now if I wanted to calculate something that was using the value 2 pi r, could simply say 2 times pi times whatever my value of r would be. We'll say 10 in this example, and we get the answer 62.8. So variables can be very useful because they can simplify calculations, and of course they can do a lot more than that. They can store information that you need to store for all sorts of things. As your programming becomes more complex, your variables will be doing all sorts of work for you. Now pi is not pi is a constant when we use it in math, but our variable in Python is not doesn't need to be a constant. We could change it if we had to, for whatever reason, to another value. So if we said pi equals 10, then asked Python what pi equaled, we would find out that it equals 10. If we were to create a new variable called x, and we were to tell Python to add x, add 1 to x, and then reassign that back into x, and then ask Python for x, we would see that x now equals 2. So variables are constantly being changed, and their values are constantly being updated as we assign different things to them. One thing that we'll need to talk about more in the future is just what exactly is what category of information belongs to a particular variable. If you've used another programming language, for instance, if you've done programming in Java, you'll know that you need to tell Java before you create that variable what its type is going to be. Here in Python, we're not doing that. This variable x that I created is simply the number 2. And if I knew a little bit about Python, I could guess that that variable was being stored as an integer, simply because it's a number without any decimal places in it. So if I ask Python to tell me what the type is by using a function, this word type with the brackets, and I put x inside of that, it will tell me that it's type int. Now variables don't need to be just numbers. They can be other things like text. So here I've created a variable n, and has the value SpongeBob with quotes around it. And if I asked Python what the type was of n, it would tell me str, or string. So string is a different type that we'll discuss further in the future, but for now we can just think of it as some information that's in text form that also can be stored in a variable. So that really sums up our first look at variables. We can simply think of them as ways to store information in our programs, And we need to be aware of the fact that different types of information are stored differently, and we'll be discussing that more as we need to in the future.